Hello and welcome back to OT the podcast. We're here to talk about watches, time, how to spend time looking at watches. I am Andy Green.
Me, Felix Schultam.
You sure are. Felix, what's on the agenda today?
SJP, the MVP, FTW.
Sarah Jessica Parker joining us or what?
No, the other SJP. And my second favourite SJP.
It's a tough call between the two. You're talking about, of course, Stephen J Pulvirent.
Pulvirent. And I'm not sure what the J stands for.
James. My money's on James.
Maybe Jason?
Everyone's middle name is James.
We will have to find out. That can be part of our fact-checking post-episode. Yeah, we chat to Stephen, who I've known for years, actually.
Long time. Your first watch boss.
Well, sort of. My first, I don't know, watch direct manager, maybe. He's really interesting to talk to, always, especially now that he's no longer working at Hodinkee. Hasn't for a while. He's been doing some creative agency things, snapping photos, but still has his toes in the watch world.
He does. I think it's hard to leave, especially, after spending so long in it and having such a pivotal role at Hodinkee for such a long time, but also, influencing the watch scene so significantly.
Must be refreshing though.
Like
to go, there's some real hot breaking news happening. I don't care about it. It's not my problem.
Yeah, just leaving those press releases on unread.
Yeah.
Speaking of refreshing, Felix.
Yes.
How refreshing were those drinks we had this Thursday night just passed at Society?
Yes,
I believe it was called.
Yeah, they were very refreshing, as I believe I referred to them as the sort of drink I would drink several of on a warm summer's balcony bar.
Which you often is a situation you find yourself in.
At least, yeah, if the weather's right. To be fair, it was not warm summer weather when we had this dinner. It was quite cold in Melbourne, but the company made up for it, Andy.
The vibes were warm. So we did a dinner with Cartier, our friends at Cartier. About 40 people turned out for it. It was quite cool. We got to see a lot of their more recent releases. I got to wear the Santos with the PVD blue bezel.
Yep.
I want to talk about that another time, though. I don't want to talk about that now.
Sure.
Because I got a lot of thoughts, and we don't have time today.
Yeah. Okay. Are we gonna wait till you buy one and then we'll talk about it, or?
Apparently quite a hard watch to get, Felix. But anyway, we got to hang out. We got to hang out with some of our Melbourne friends. It was really cool. So it was an us thing. But what have you been up to?
Aside from thinking fondly about that Pasha that I wore on the night, that was great. I've been seeing watches. Actually, it's the time of the year when traveling collections make their way down to Australia.
Yep.
I saw the other week, popped into the Panerai boutique on Collins Street, right next to the IWC boutique on Collins Street, and saw some of their new watches that we have been talking about but haven't seen IRL yet. 44 millimeter submersibles in particular. There was the E-Steel in your favorite Grijo Roja.
Love that. The green.
Whatever that Sverde Esmeralda.
Yes, smell.
Is that right?
Esmeralda. I don't know. It sounds like a Disney princess.
Yeah, I was going to say Frozen 3 villain. But no, really beautiful watches. I like the straps as well. That sort of recycled PET plastic straps, that were cool. The one I would probably be tempted to take home, though, was the 44 millimeter white dial on a green rubber strap. Like very plain Jane, but just wearable. And it stood out.
It stood out this year when we sort of got the press pick. So I'm glad to hear that.
Stands out on the wrist.
Ooh.
But they were not the only. Also, got a bit of a hint as to what's coming up in the pipeline for Panerai. I haven't even told you about this, but I think 2023 is going to be a really interesting year.
Very good. But you didn't just see Panerai. You made your way a little bit further down Collins Street.
Yep. It took me a few days because my appointment was at a different time. But I saw a watch that we've been talking about since the podcast started. The release of this watch predates the podcast. And I haven't seen it until now. The Lange Odysseus.
Wow, in the metal, at several iterations in. This was the titanium you saw. We haven't even seen the steel that came out first.
Yeah, the titanium. Everyone's doing high end titanium these days. I think I actually wrote a thing about this for Mr. Porter. I don't think I've talked about that.
Well, you have to link it up. But what an interesting unicorn of a watch. It's evaded us for 4 years.
Do you know what I did find interesting, Andy, about this? Like,
Yeah.
watch, of course, wears really well, lovely design. I'm sold on it. Please, can I have one? No, you can't. Um, so I was there there was a gentleman from Germany there as well, the head of the Zeitwerk department, I think.
Oh, yes.
And he was saying that this is only the second time he's seen that watch because they're in such demand. They just don't hang around. Like they get made. They go straight out to clients. They don't use them for marketing purposes. They don't. This is, I'm assuming, the one from Geneva that they've got, but everything else is just going to people who I assume are patiently waiting their turn to get them.
It is fascinating because it's a watch. We know a lot of people. We know a lot of people with a lot of watches. We know a lot of very big watch collectors with a lot of money to spend on watches, and it's to evade us for years and years and years. There's not that many watches or watches from any brand that have been able to do that. So
I mean, to be fair, I haven't gone out of my way to try and
mythical. Well, I wouldn't know anyone to ask. That's the point. I wouldn't. I
yeah.
don't even know someone who's got one.
Must be a few in Australia by now.
I reckon there'd be like 5 or 6 at most.
Sure.
At most.
At most. Sorry, that would be great if we were talking about JLC next.
What are you talking about next?
Well, another thing, some feedback from previous episodes. I don't know about you, but I've been getting some vigorous debate. Actually, no, it's been unanimous support for our take on Ryan Gosling as Ken.
Yes.
No
Yeah.
one likes it.
Resounding support for your hot take on that.
Well, I mean, I think it's that hot if everyone agrees with it. A lot of also positive sentiment about your thoughts for Zac Efron for Ken.
Love to hear it.
But another role, perhaps more suited to Ryan Gosling, is his latest Netflix thriller, The Grey Man, where he plays, I'm going to say, an assassin, perhaps a covert operative, perhaps.
You've seen it? You've watched it?
No, but I wrote a story on it or edited a story on it for a website. I saw the press release.
Heard good things.
Well, press release, by the way, not for the movie, but for Tag Heuer.
Yes.
Tag Heuer's all over it.
He's wearing it's a partnership with Ryan Gosling and Netflix and Tag Heuer.
Yes. Silver Dog Carrera.
Very good. Three-hander. Oh, that's interesting. All right. Well, yeah, I did see that got released recently, so I'm going to have to check it out.
Yeah, we'll pop the trailer in. Maybe we can watch it. We can have a little Netflix watch party with the team from Tag Heuer.
Yeah. Maybe no Discord. Very cool. I've been playing new game just came out called The Quarry.
Oh, it's about rock mining?
No, it's an interactive drama horror game. It's the follow-up to a game from 2015 called Until Dawn.
Yep. Critically acclaimed.
Heard of that?
Yes, yeah, critically acclaimed,
Rami Malek takes the Until Dawn. But this one is, terrifying. Terrifying so far. I'm only about 35, 40 minutes in.
Yeah.
But with, 7 years of tech and the way they do like the motion capture and it's a slow burn.
Yeah.
But goodness me, Felix.
I watched the trailer. It's terrifying. Graphics have got a lot better since I was a kid. Also, Ethan Suppley's in it. And David Arquette is like...
David Arquette's, heavy star. So I'm excited. I've heard great things. I love the use of, storytelling and the interactive nature of it. It feels very different to a lot of games that are out there. So
what's the gameplay style? Is it like you've got to click on things, or is it like sort of, are you a first person shooter, or is it a mix of?
It's basically a decision making. So you wander around with a torch or a light object of some sort. You can go find things, and then everything's a decision tree. So you can react to things. So you can choose different paths to go down. And then you can choose how you react. And then there are a few quick time events as well. If you fuck up, you kind of probably die.
Yep, going to combat or something or whatever.
Yeah, so part of it is sort of learning, and you have to really pay a lot of attention so you can learn how the characters are, their personalities, what reaction will work in what situation, and that's how they draw you in. That's how they really get you to focus. Because if you don't, there'll be that you won't learn that stuff, but you also miss a quick time event, and then that's quite bad. So
right, so each character's got like different stats. Like if there's someone that's like a more sort of jockey guy.
That'll just be the personality of the character. Sure. So then you're just really drawn in and you're paying a lot of attention, and then they'll just drop some bullshit jump scare stuff on you and terrify you. So
sure. Yeah.
It's a good time.
Yeah, cool. I'm down for it. You know what else I'm down for, Andy?
Is it the Tag Heuer Aquaracer Professional 300 Orange Diver?
Yeah, this week's sponsor, Tag Heuer. Thank you very much, Tag Heuer. Yes, this is a watch that we saw briefly. I saw it a little while ago, but I think you've been spending some more quality time with it.
It's on my wrist right now, Felix.
Um, I want to ask you how you find it in a second, but before, let me just run through the top line premise
Mm.
of this watch. It's a Aquaracer 300, which is a sort of more professional dive watch as compared to the 200, and it's got, as the name suggests, a very bright orange dial, which is a nod to a rare historic watch, one of the early 844s that had an orange dial. And
Super rare.
yeah, it also makes sense in the world of underwater watches because orange has historically sort of been the color of marine safety and is apparently visible underwater.
Yeah, apparently. Apparently.
How have you found it, Andy? Visible underwater?
Sure. So I really like it. I really like that it's in the newer Tag Heuer case that we sort of saw, I think it was last year now, with that updated sort of profile, updated ergonomics, the octagonal kind of design cues all over. So I'm a big fan of this because it's 43, but it really doesn't wear like a large watch, and
Right.
it's not thick, it's not chonky. It's really quite comfortable and it fits really nicely and really close to the wrist.
Yep.
So wearability, I love. Obviously, the bracelet has that clasp with the quick adjustment, so you can kind of slide it in.
I'm a real. Is it? It's tapered and thin, isn't it? As well, that bracelet.
It's There's a slight taper to it.
Yeah.
There's a slight taper to it, and the bracelet links are quite thin themselves, but you
Yeah.
can kind of adjust it, on the go. And
Okay.
obviously, a really easy clasp to use itself.
Yep.
The color is very, very cool. The one thing I like is obviously the dial is that bright orange, but it has a really nice sort of pattern across it. I guess ribbing maybe, and of course the
Horizontal stripes.
horizontal stripes, if you will. The one thing is really cool is the Cyclops
Yeah.
inside.
Oh,
Inner Cyclops is an innie, not an outie.
nice. Love it.
So not bulging out of the top of the sapphire crystal, which means kind of keeps it a bit more sleeker, but still very functional.
yeah. Traditionally, that's been people that complain about Cyclops's complaint is that they upset the profile. Not
Yeah.
gee, I like the fact that the loom is pretty hectic, as with all of
Mm.
these new Aquaracers.
Yep, 100%.
I like that the loom plots outlined in black. I think that contrast with the black, the white, and the orange on the dial is really, really tasty.
Yeah, yeah, that black outline really kind of works with that black ceramic bezel as well.
Yep, yep, yep.
So
Uh, who who's this for? Like, I'm assuming a professional saturation divers will be fine with it, but who should buy this over another sort of Aquaracer dial?
so the price is 47.50 Australian dollars on bracelet.
Great price.
That's a very, very good price, very competitive for what you get. It's just about everything you need in an everyday watch, a dive watch with that sort of bright, bold burst of color. Who's it for? Like I said, 43 mils, you can get away with it on a smaller wrist. So I wouldn't just say it's, oh yeah, the bigger wrist, wearers and people that are a bit more active. I think if you're at all into a little bit more of an adventurous lifestyle, you're really going to like this watch. This would be amazing at the beach, surfing, that sort of thing. If you're anywhere near the water, to me, this feels like if I was turning 21 and I got this for like my 21st birthday present somehow,
Mm.
it'd be a pretty cool 21st birthday present.
Yeah, for me, it's if it was me buying it, I would buy this maybe not as like my core daily piece, but this would be like I'm gonna have fun. Either it's I'm going on weekend, or I'm having holiday, any of that. Like I would gravitate to this watch. Like this is a air quotes fun watch for me.
It's a huge amount of fun and,
Yep.
beat it up. You're not going to break this watch. Like, it's just so tough.
That's our the OT guarantee.
The OT guarantee. Yeah, take it anywhere. Holidays, trips. Yeah, really just beat it up and get some nice scratches and scuffs on there.
Yeah. Anyway, check it out, tagheuer.com. We'll link it in the show notes. You've taken some pics, Andy. We'll probably put them somewhere.
All over the interwebs. Yeah, and thank you, Tag Heuer, for supporting today's show, Felix.
Cool, 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 cool.
All right, Felix, we ready to get SJP on?
Give me a minute, Andy. I've just needed to conveniently resize the strap on my Helios, which is,
Mhm.
of course, the Artem loopless sailcloth. Check them out, artem.straps on Instagram, artemstraps.com. It's still holding up strong, Andy.
Yeah, I mean, Artem Straps have been supporting the show all year now. Very important to have, an Aussie brand on board the OT bandwagon.
Based out of Adelaide, we get the occasional shipping notification. Very exciting times. And of course, their latest products are a very extensive and I'm going to say superlative NATO strap offering.
You know what look good on this Aquaracer we just talked about? One of their black NATOs.
I mean,
Be perfect.
yeah, go well.
22 mil.
Yeah, check him out. But let's get the main man on.
Give him a call, see what he's been up to.
Andy, these days, Stephen Pulvirent is an artist, a creative director, and a writer who's living the dream in Los Angeles. He is the founder of Rime and Reason, but I'm fairly willing to bet that most of our listeners know him from his long and prestigious stint at Hodinkee. Stephen, it's a genuine pleasure to welcome you to OT. How are you?
I'm doing good, thanks. It's good to talk to you guys. I feel like we used to see a lot of each other, and then the world happened, and we haven't seen so much of each other the last couple of years.
Only on the gram.
Only on the gram.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, where all my best friends are these days.
Felix, you and Stephen used to work together. It's just occurred to me you've left this off our list of questions.
Theoretically, we did.
Theoretically.
Yeah.
Like I was one of the sort of unprofessional writers that Stephen, as I believe the first employee of Hodinkee, inherited. Then you had to kind of manage me for a few years.
Was your first watch writing job, Felix?
Sorry?
Was it your first watch writing gig?
Yeah.
Wow.
That's funny. I was going to put it the opposite way, Felix, and say that you were already established at Hodinkee, and then I came in and you had to start doing everything my way because I was just bossy and just wanted to do shit my way.
You gave a sense of a shape and a purpose to what was.
I love to hear that.
Loosely passionate and enthusiastic group of disparate individuals.
Those early days were fun though. We really kind of like made a lot out of a little, and it was a fun time.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I can't speak to it from a particularly informed point of view. I was on the other side of the planet, but it is amazing to see where all those people that were that sort of first and early batch of writers for Hodinkee, where they are now, and it's sure like all of them are still in the space, maybe bar one or two.
Yeah. No, I think almost everyone. Yeah, it's fun, and it's funny. During the latter part of my tenure at Hodinkee, it was also funny to see the opposite. Like all the people who I used to be with at dinners and on press junkets and whatever, and then they slowly all got like accumulated into Hodinkee. So like the Joe Thompson and Jack Forrester and John Buse, like. These were the guys I learned from in the early days because like I'd be lucky enough to get seated next to one of them at a dinner, or we'd be on a junket together or whatever. And then like all of a sudden that just became like my office colleagues. And it wasn't that all of a sudden, like it was over the course of many years, but it was funny to see how, kind of like there's sort of like an osmosis, like, or a kind of maybe a rotating door kind of between inside and outside. It was fun to see.
Everyone sort of came together.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a nice little bit of nostalgia. We got that out of the way. Let's look to the future. What's it like to not, sort of be formally living and breathing watches? How's it?
Yeah, it's great. And it's great in two ways. One, like I've been a journalist, in scare quotes my entire adult life. Like I started a blog in college and then freelance wrote my way through graduate school and then came out of school, had another job very briefly, and then ended up at Hodinkee. And so like that's been my mode of like interacting with the world. And it's been kind of cool at like 32 years old to basically have to like relearn how to like wake up every morning and relate to the world, like not through publishing deadlines, not through watching the news wire, not through seeing what everybody else's coverage is like it's just a whole new way of being, which is kind of connected to watches, kind of disconnected to watches. But then from a purely watch standpoint, I think no matter how much you love watches, if you're covering the industry day in and day out, there are times where like it really just starts to feel like a job. And where you get kind of tunnel vision and you get bogged down and it like it can stop being fun, and it can then start being fun again. And, it kind of goes up and down over the years, at least in my experience. But um, I've really enjoyed just like being a watch hobbyist for the first time. Like, I love watches, and yes, I work in watches, which we can talk about in a different capacity. But like, I also just now am just like a collector who enjoys watches, and like I have some buddies who are also into watches who are not industry people, like they're just other collectors,
Yeah,
and
nice.
who I'm chatting with. I've, a friend who we end up exchanging wrist shots like probably 6 days a week. And another friend who I'm, throwing an online auction listings back and forth with a couple times a week. And like, it's fun to get to be quote unquote in it from that perspective, and not from the perspective of a journalist or somebody who has some sort of like quote unquote role in the pipeline.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Because like when I got into watches, it was I started off with like watch groups, and it was very much enthusiast, and then it quickly turned, like I didn't really have a good amount of time before it turned into work for me. And then since we started doing the podcast, Felix, it's really been it's work obviously for us, but it's a lot lighter touch for me for watches. So I get to choose when I dip in and out, and I can relate to having those watch friends where you just are sending each other like tropical watch listings, or an auction listing, or a stupid wrist shot that is a terrible photo, that it's just to show your mate where you are or something. And it is good to help with that appreciation, I think, of watches, because there's certainly times when when it's full time and you're just sitting there. If I see one more solid gold 44mm dive watch from Blancpain that's $30,000, I'm gonna throw my computer out the window. Have you had any moments where you kind of you've come up for air and you do look back and everything seems a little bit silly?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've covered a couple other industries in my journalistic capacity. I was, at Bloomberg. I was a tech reporter. So I was doing, on one side, I was doing luxury stuff, which was, watches plus. So it was watches, electronics. It was sometimes furniture, sometimes food and beverage. Like, it was a mix of things. But then I also like was reviewing iPhones, for example. And like, that world has its own like weird idiosyncrasies and culture and whatever. And I think the watch world is rightfully known as a as a subculture with, and as an industry with, a lot of idiosyncrasies. And like, being out of them, you do start to notice it. The stuff that just think of as a matter of fact and as a part of doing your job and doesn't even register. It starts to register when you're not seeing it for, a couple months at a time. So just a weird like politics of the groups, how different brands work together or don't work together, who's trying to like do collabs and capitalize on like the current fashion moment, like all of these things where you see some stuff and you're just like, okay, I'm not going to give anybody a hard time specifically by name, but I think it's overall, the watch world is looking, the actual industry, not the collector base, but the industry, I think is certainly more progressive than it was when I got started doing this, 10 years ago. But there's still moments where you're just like, come on, guys, like it's
a bit weird.
It's 2022, like get with the program. It's not 1964 here. Can we please like do business like adults?
They
But
just take
yeah.
themselves so seriously, Stephen.
Yeah, I mean, that's most of it, right? Is it's like the super self-serious press releases, the, some like second tier watch brand collaborates with some second tier someone on a watch and acts like it's like the greatest cultural production since like, Giacometti, and you're like, come on, guys, like you made a watch, cool,
If you have
good
to
job.
Google the collaborator, then it's
Yeah,
probably not a
exactly.
good collaboration.
Yeah, or you see, I mean, this isn't anything that's going to come as any surprise, but like, not having to be responsible for this as a professional has made it easier to laugh at, which is like, there's basically three types of watches that sell, two or three types of watches that sell, and every brand, no matter who they are, is just scrambling to try to make those same watches. And it's really amazing to watch an industry just basically decide that there's only like 2 winning formulas now. And because of our current economic climate, like everybody needs to sell stuff. So they need surefire sales. So like to watch everybody try to make their version of a Rolex sport watch or their version of a Nautilus or Royal Oak over the last couple of years, again, now that I'm not responsible for writing up news reports and reviews and analysis of those watches, it's much easier for me to just shake my head and kind of laugh at it and just be like, all right, everybody, like,
Incredible.
you realize you're all getting in a line that at some point is going to expire. Like, maybe look for the next thing. Maybe try to be the next thing as opposed to trying to bandwagon. But I don't know.
Watch executives, listen to this podcast. Stephen is talking to tell you the truth.
Yeah, please.
Side note: a watch collab with Giacometti would be kind of cool. Who has?
I would buy that. I would buy that. Giacometti Foundation. If you want to collab with somebody, I'm all over that.
What is your, aside from the silliness and the 2 models or die approach, what is your take on where we've seen? I mean, I know we're going to get off watches in a minute. What your take on 2022, its releases, and the scene is at the moment? Where are we at?
Yeah. I think, funnily enough, I think we're kind of like all over the place. Despite the fact that I just said everybody's making the same watches, which I think is largely true. I think there's some brands that are really killing it and have been, and they've been kind of coming into their own. And it's cool to watch, and I'm excited just as an enthusiast and a collector to see it. I can give a couple examples. I mean, I'm excited that Bulgari obviously kind of had a really interesting hit on their hands with the Octo Finissimo a number of years ago, and I think those of us kind of in it didn't really have a good read on whether this was going to be like a long-term thing or whether this was going to be a hit model for a couple years. They'd release 2 or 3 versions and then it would fade out. Um, I feel pretty good at this point about saying that not only does that model have staying power, but I think like Bulgari as an attractive, desirable luxury watchmaker is here to stay and worth paying attention to.
Having said that, they did put a QR code on a watch this year.
They did put a QR code on a watch, which might be the single cringiest thing I've seen this year in watches. Just like
was it linking to crypto as well?
I have, I can't remember.
NFT?
I think there is an
Some
NFT.
NFT?
I think there is an NFT associated with the watch. It's honestly, knowing the people at that brand, like both the CEO, the creative director, like there are smart, talented people at that brand. Like I think actually some of the smartest, most talented people in the industry. The fact that made it all the way through is like genuinely shocking to me. Like I'm pretty used to watch brands doing dumb things. And this one I was just like, I cannot believe that this made it through. But c'est la vie, I think other than that, I think they're doing a pretty good job. I think Vacheron is killing it. I think while everybody's, on wait lists to get Royal Oaks and Nautilus, I think the overseas stuff they're doing is awesome. I think the sort of more traditional watchmaking stuff they're doing is awesome. The Historiques 222 is maybe my favorite release of the year. I'd be kind of hard pressed to think of a watch release this year that I personally just would want more than that.
Interesting.
Omega's continuing to do a great job making like really high quality watches at pretty reasonable prices for what you get. And I think they do a great job kind of splitting the difference between, the mass market person who sees it in a James Bond movie or at the Olympics and the like diehard collectors. I think they do a great job servicing both markets in a way that most brands really struggle with. Grand Seiko, I think, continues to just knock it out of the park. And I'll say caveat there, I do work with them as under the capacity of my agency, but I've been a collector and fan of that brand for a long time. I don't think that I don't think our working together influences my ability to be just like objective about those watches. They're great.
Sure.
Yeah, I just think there's a lot of brands who are like the kind of stalwarts, right? Like the brands we all want to be doing a good job. The Grand Seikos of the world, the Vacherons of the world, the Omegas of the world, the Tudors of the world, and like those brands are doing a great job, and that makes me happy. Those are watches that people actually buy. They're watches in many cases that are on the more affordable end of the spectrum, and
Accessible.
yeah, and I just, it makes me happy to see good brands making watches that like quote unquote normal people can save up to buy, and don't have to sit on crazy wait lists or whatever. And like those are the products that ultimately I think grow or don't grow watches as a category. Um, yeah, IWC is another one. I almost forgot them. They're crushing it. Cartier crushing it. Like to me, those are like core brands of the industry, and it's like, it's almost like the Fortune 500, right? Like you can get a pretty good sense of how the broader industry is doing by kind of taking the temperature of the real kind of like core pillars.
Yeah.
And to me, if like IWC and Cartier and Omega and Tudor and Grand Seiko and Vacheron and let's say AP and Patek and Rolex, like if those brands are doing well, the industry is probably like on the whole in a good spot and looking to a good future. And that seems to be the case to me right now.
Interesting.
I love it. I want to go back to Bulgari quickly
Yeah.
because you're a very early supporter of the Octo Finissimo when it first came out. It
Yeah.
must have been 5 years ago or something. And I think I vividly remember you seeing great potential in that watch. One thing that irks me about the Octo Finissimo, this many years on, is that I still think it's a little bit too big. But I want to see if I can get a hot take out of you. Do you think that they've done, it's lived up to its potential, or has it still got some time to go? Do you still kind of back those early thoughts on the Octo Finissimo?
Yeah. So here's I'll give you both sides of the take.
Okay.
The take is, yes, I think it's lived up to its potential, and it's I hate using the word icon, but like
Uh-huh.
it's as close to like a modern icon as you can get. Like it's a new design language, it's unique, it's like the design tells you something about the history of the brand too. Like it's a deeply Bulgari watch, which I think is important.
Yep.
It's great. I think it's interesting that they've kind of straddled this line of like very reasonably priced, time only, like super basic. And then also every time they release a new grand comp, it's in that watch first, which I think is a cool strategy. I still wish the watch was like 1.5 millimeters smaller.
Yeah, right.
I don't own one, and the main reason I don't own one is because it's so thin and it has those very short downturned lugs that are like, the lugs are basically non-existent,
Yeah.
right? Especially because of how they arch down and the thickness of the case or thinness of the case. It's basically a lugless. It's a flat watch with no lugs, essentially. It hangs over the edge of my wrist in a way that I think looks silly and is not super comfortable. So honestly, the main reason I don't own one at this point and haven't like sold something else or like figured out a way to buy one is because it's ultimately too big for me. So I can say objectively, I think it's great. Personally, I wish it was a little bit smaller because then I'd buy one.
Yeah, and I think that's really just to sort of put my 2 cents in on that. Like that's a watch's concept versus an object versus watch as something you wear. They have to marry up, and
Yeah.
like,
I think for most people, obviously there's people that it doesn't, and they could just say, "Oh yeah, I like it. I'm just going to buy it and have it and never wear it," like most big pilot wearers, right?
Yeah.
like there
Yeah.
are plenty of people that just love the design of the big pilot and just have it and collect it. And oh yeah, I bought it. It's too big for me, but I just love it and I want to have it. But I don't think everyone has that luxury where, if they're going to spend 20 grand on a watch,
exactly.
maybe it needs to be,
Sure.
get your wear out of it.
Yeah, you can do both. And I was just sort of hypothesizing. Imagine if they did that ultra thin caliber with a curve movement. It would be so ridiculously hard to do, but it would be cool. Curve it curve it to the wrist a little bit. That'd be nuts.
Yeah, that would be insane. I mean,
Stephen's
like you
like,
said,
"Nah,
it'd be
not gonna
very
happen."
difficult, but holy cow, that'd be amazing.
Yeah, it'd be cool. Speaking of, sort of you looking back at like the big, the watches you've seen released and sort of called early on, are there any, from when you started professionally in watches to, the end of your editorial career, I suppose, are there any sort of models, releases, or even, vintage references that you missed, that you slept on, or that you should have bought 10x of?
Oh my god, it's the
What's
main,
the biggest? What's the main one?
it's the main story of my career. Yeah, I can give you a couple examples. On the vintage side of things, Hodinkee is pretty well affiliated with the rise of Universal Genève. I
Sorry, I
bought,
think basically every watch, every vintage watch Hodinkee's well affiliated with over the
yeah,
last 10, 15 years, I got to say.
that's fair. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the UG market, I bought a pole router, which I have. It was my first vintage
Mm,
watch. I bought it when I finished graduate school. Um, it was like $1,000 for a really nice example. It's great. I love it. Prices on those actually haven't gone up too much, which is kind of nice because the incentive for me to sell this like sentimentally valuable watch is very low. Like I'd make a couple $100 on it maybe. It's not like it's now a $10,000 watch. So that's actually kind of nice for me. But other UG I did not buy. I always said I would buy later, and I didn't because it got crazy. I really wish I'd bought. I'm mostly, as you guys both know, I'm like a pretty simple watch person.
mm,
I don't own anything more complicated than time and date. Most of my watches are three hand, or just time only. That's really my preference. I've owned chronographs over the years. I've owned simple calendars. I never keep them. I always end up selling them for something simpler. Uh, I should have bought some like complicated UG, some like triple calendars and triple calendar chronographs, some tri compacts, back when they were like $2,000, $2,500, and now they're like 15 grand, 20 grand. Um, I had an opportunity to buy a really amazing 2447 Carrera early on. Again, I don't know if I would have kept it because it's a chronograph, but just a really beautiful Panda dial, for like, I think it was a hair under $3,000. Maybe it was a hair over $3,000, from a great collector. Literally offered it to me off his wrist. I was like, oh, that's beautiful. And he's like, oh, you want it? And I was 23 and there was absolutely no way I could do that. So there's been some of that stuff. I mean, obviously, like, do I wish I'd found some way to scrape my pennies together and buy a vintage Royal Oak
Yeah.
in 2013 when I could have done it for under 15,000 US? Like, sure, of course I do. But again, at the time, like, I didn't have $15,000. I don't even know if like the credit limit on my credit card was $15,000 at that point. Like, I don't know
Yeah.
that I even could have just like charged it and figured it out later. So yeah, plenty of that stuff. And then on the modern watch front, it's less stuff that I wish I'd bought and slept on, like limited editions that I'd wish I'd bought. It's more, there are a handful of watches where like when I saw them or met the people who made them, it kind of like was like paradigm shifting for me. The first time I met um Recep Recepi and Rex showed me the Chronomet Contemporain and we like sat down and had a coffee for 20-30 minutes. I was like, oh, okay, like this guy's the guy. This is somebody I need to watch and pay attention to. And this being in the industry, like we get so many requests from new watchmakers, from independent watchmakers who are just like, check out the thing I'm doing. Come see this. I'm making the craziest, most amazing watch of all time and nobody knows about it. And 99 times out of 100, it's like, hey, it's really cool. You are a watchmaker and you love making watches and you're making something that expresses you. And if you can find clients to pay for it and make a little career out of this, great. And I don't mean a little career out of this in a diminutive way, but like if you can pay your bills and make a living for yourself and maybe hire some people, great. That's amazing. And then occasionally that one time in 100, you meet somebody and you're like, oh, you're a genius. This is, you're really pushing things to the next level. Rex is one example of that.
Yeah.
First time I met Roman Gauthier, I had no idea what I was walking into. And as I walked into his booth at Basel in Hall 2, like way in some back corner, Philippe Dufour was walking out. And I was like, oh, maybe I should pay attention here, So yeah, there's a handful of moments like that. But in terms of stuff I wish I'd bought, it's basically exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah.
It's like,
Hindsight.
I should have bought more old Rolex. I should have bought more old AP. I should have scrimped together the money and found a way to buy an old Patek. Like it's the basic stuff. It's just stuff where now I'm priced out and I just don't.
Back to the Future.
Yeah.
Sort of adjacent to that. Yeah, being such an early part of Hodinkee, and they're from basically the start until it's real peak. I'll say that you don't have to comment. When did you realize? I'm not even going to ask was there. I'm going to ask when you realized the enormous influence that you and the Hodinkee team had as the most influential watch platform in the world. And we can only imagine, right? Millions of visitors, if not per week, but a piece of content goes out and we all see the eyeballs, and just that influence of we are shaping the watch industry, we're shaping the secondhand market and the first-hand market, the new market. When did you realize that?
That's a really good question. I don't think anybody has ever asked me that question, and I don't have a great answer for you off the top of my head. That's an incredible question. That's a really good one. When did, I can give, there's one answer that I can't remember exactly when it was, but I remember the kind of feeling of it. And then there's one that's a very kind of nuts and bolts answer. The nuts and bolts answer, that's the less exciting answer, was my second Basel World. When we got like a proper meeting with Rolex. It, pre me signing on, I remember, Ben telling stories of like Rolex wouldn't allow digital media in the booth at Basel World. So, Ben used to write like a recap of the week for like either Men's Health or GQ or somebody, I can't remember who it was. And like his credential for his Rolex group meeting at the show, where it was like him and 10 other journalists, had him written down as like columnist for whatever, not founder of Hodinkee. Then I remember like my first year, we were allowed in a group meeting. But then that second year, the first year where like we got a private meeting with like some pretty high up folks from Rolex Geneva, not even the US team, but like the folks from Switzerland wanted to sit down and talk to us. That was when I was like, okay, this is the biggest watch company in the world. And like they want an audience with us, or they want to give us an audience with them, and like they want to sit down face to face and like chat and like gauge our interest and whatever. Like if they care, we must be onto something, because if they had any inkling that we were like a fad or something, kind of transient, they wouldn't give us the time of day. So that was one where it was just like, oh, okay, like we're playing with the big boys now. And then the irony of me saying playing with the big boys was, I remember this meeting, and it was Ben, myself, and 3 women high up in Geneva. So funny that I would choose that expression. But there was that, and then I can't remember what the first big event was that we hosted. But early on, like back when I was there from like 2012 to 2014, we would do events. And like the first time we got in a room and there were like 50 to 100 people, all just like really interested in the stuff we spent our day doing. It still gets me now, when I have those experiences, but for like, again, like a 22, 23-year-old kid, like that was really impactful to be like, oh, the stuff I wake up and spend my time and energy doing every day, like actually matters. Like there are people out there in the world who read it and care about it and make purchasing decisions based on it and want to like get home late from work so they can come hang out and talk about it. And it was a really good feeling. And it was a really good validator that like the stuff we were doing and putting our energy into was worthwhile.
On the other side of that, like Andy was saying, obviously at your time you had a sort of fairly big influence on, shaping that watch culture, either, implicitly or explicitly. For you, or, maybe for the company culture more broadly, how seriously did you take that? Well, like, were you aware when you're like, oh, I'm going to write up this, let's say this Universal Genève, maybe a bit later on, did you consciously go, this is going to, or were you aware that this was going to change the prices and change the market? Or did you have to sort of push that to the side?
Yeah, I'd say that at a certain point, I don't know when, maybe not during my first stint there, which was 2012 to 2014, but like in the latter stint, which started summer 2016. I think I was like aware of it, but I would say it's not a thing that I found helpful to like think about on a daily basis. I don't know. I'm very much like whatever I'm working on, I'm very much the work comes first. Like if the work is good, everything else falls into place, um, and ends up how it should be. So for me, the really critical thing was taking the part of that was important to think about was the responsibility part of it, was the idea that if I say a watch is good, or if I say somebody should buy this thing, or if I say this is better than that, or if I say this presents good value, there are quite literally like millions of
Yep.
potential people who will see it. And some percentage of those people will make purchasing decisions. And I have gotten many, many DMs as recently as like last week. Somebody sent me a note and said they bought a tank because they saw it on my Instagram or whatever, and they'd been thinking about it for a while. And like I know how important those decisions, those purchasing decisions are to me, and how personal and kind of like important they feel. And I always thought it was important, and I always tried to instill this in the rest of the editorial team, I think for the most part to pretty good effect, that like you have to assume that when you say something, people are going to take it at face value and that they're going to act on it. And you should feel good about that. And if you don't, then you should think of something different to say, or a different way to say it. Like the last thing I ever wanted is for a watch that I was like lukewarm on, for somebody to like message me and be like, hey, I saw your story about this and bought one. It's like, oh shit, did I just like accidentally talk somebody into spending $30,000 on something that I like don't actually like that much? Luckily that was very rarely the case, but yeah, so that's the part that I think is helpful, and from my opinion, like healthy to think about, is to take seriously that if you're a reporter and to some degree a critic and to some degree a news source about these things, like you have to take seriously that people this information matters to people in a like tangible, concrete, financial way. The part I didn't find helpful to think about was the like making markets and changing watch culture and creating trends and whatever. Like to me, the real key was just like to put it really bluntly, is just like write just like banger stories and make beautiful pictures and killer videos. And if the stuff is really good and you believe in the stuff you're making, all the other shit falls into place and it all works out, and it all like the results will end up being things you're happy with for the most part, if the stuff you're putting out is actually good. So that's where I tried to put most of my energy. Also, there was just so much to like make and do that I kind of had to operate that way, or I'm not sure everything would have gotten done.
It's really interesting, and it's a thoughtful point. Is that there are, despite the people that are always commenting, and the comments never tend to be overly positive or
Sure.
they tend to be negative, but there are, for every negative comment, there's probably 10 people taking a piece of content at face value and going and actually being influenced and informed by it. And I'm sure Felix and I have had similar conversations where you talk about it, you are reviewing a product that no one's seen yet, or they've not had the chance to go and look at. You're giving your thoughts, which is actually quite valuable, and it's an important thing. It's your credibility you're putting out there. And yeah, like I agree, I always used to think, well, what if someone went because of what I said, someone went out and just bought it. Because there are people out there that have enough money to just go do that and be like, okay, yeah, well, Stephen or Felix says it's cool. I'm just going to go buy it because I trust them. And the last thing you want to do is take advantage of, of that, the trust. So on that note, you've made a claim recently, and I want to ask you a little bit more about it. 1016 is as good as it gets. Why?
Why? Okay, that's a good question.
What?
I think it is the perfect embodiment to me of the everything you need, nothing you don't kind of design mentality. It's a great size. It's super comfortable. It looks and wears great on a bracelet. It looks and wears great on a NATO strap. It looks and wears great on a dressy leather strap. Like I've worn my 1016 with like cocktail suit and tie situation. I wear it all the time with like t-shirts and shorts, it looks kind of like not timeless in a sort of cliche way. It looks almost like out of time. Like it could have been designed in the 30s. It could have been designed yesterday. And I kind of like that ambiguity to it. I'm very lucky to have an example that I love. It's a really early, like 62-ish gilt exclamation point chapter ring. Like it's got all the bells and whistles from a kind of collecting standpoint. The gilt dial, the glossy gilt dial, like I'll just say now, like if you're listening to this and you're at all interested in vintage Rolex and you've never owned or like worn for a real period of time a gilt dial Rolex, try to make that happen. They're expensive. I get it. It's like, that's like telling you to like, hey, if you can drive a McLaren, go drive a McLaren. But like, it's like, I know it's kind of like a stupid thing to say, but like, if you have collector friends who have them, or you have the opportunity to even go just like hang out with a dealer for an afternoon and, you're kind of transparent about the fact that you're not buying anything, but you just want to check some stuff out. They're such special watches. And I really believe that and have handled thousands and thousands and thousands of watches over the last decade. There is something about a gilt dial, in my opinion, preferably no date, sport Rolex that is just, it's just something else. It really just like, it hits me in the right spot and I love it.
Not to mention the size as well.
Yeah, I mean, 36 millimeters to me is just, I mean, I'm a smaller guy. I'm 5'7". I have kind of small wrists. It's a perfect watch for me. I love it. Prices are starting to go up to the point where I definitely don't wear mine as much as I wish I did and as much as I used to. The watch is worth like more than, or probably about double what I paid for it. It's on a bracelet that I love. It's one of those stretch rivet bracelets from the early 60s. But like as a result, it feels a little more fragile maybe than a watch I'd want to wear every day. So yeah. But as far as I'm concerned, like if I had to decide like what is I won't say the best watch. I don't think there is a best watch. I think that's like what's the best painting, like that doesn't exist. Or the best food, like that's just not a thing that it is. But I think for me, my favorite watch of all time is a 1016, is a Rolex Explorer.
That, I mean, you've sold me on it. But Stephen, I don't know if you're necessarily aware of this. There is more to your personality than watches.
I've heard that from time to time.
Yeah,
I've heard that from time to time, but
your Instagram, if anyone has following it, and certainly they should be after this, there's some beautiful images that you create yourself.
Thank you.
As we were talking just before we started recording, you've come back from a trip abroad.
I have, yeah.
What inspires you creatively? What did you take? Refilled that creative battery while you were overseas.
Yeah, I mean, what fuels me creatively is learning, and specifically like in the process of learning things, learning that there's more stuff I don't know. It's the old like you don't know what you don't know. And I find for me the most inspiring thing is encountering, whether it's reading a great book or seeing some great art or traveling to a beautiful place or meeting new people or whatever, is that experience of like encountering a thing that teaches me just a little bit, but in addition to teaching me that little bit, kind of shows me a whole slew of things that I don't know anything about. And that kind of like distance between what I now know and what I know I don't know, to me is really inspiring. And a lot of my work is about me trying to like close that gap a little bit, but like knowing that every time I take a step forward, the kind of like horizon's going to get 2 steps further away. And kind of soaking in that and allowing myself to kind of like live in that space, is the most inspiring thing for me.
And so, I mean, I'm interested because you've turned into, a professional endeavor. What was it like transitioning from hobbyist to professional artist?
Yeah, it's been great. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, it was part of why, when I decided it was time to leave Hodinkee and I started Rime and Reason, the agency. The reason for doing that and not finding another full-time job or changing to a different industry or whatever was that I still love the kind of rough sketch of what I was doing, which is communicating about products, largely visually, sometimes written, sometimes audio, sometimes video.
Yep.
And I still love that. And now I'm just doing it kind of on the brand side versus on the consumer side. But was being able to integrate my artistic practice, however pretentious that phrase sounds, into my professional life. So it's not a coincidence. It's not oh, isn't it nice that I can also make time to like make my art? It's that this new career situation was like specifically engineered to have like to be a hybrid of a quote unquote day job and being an artist. And it's been great. It's been great to be able to say that like if I'm going to spend, 8 hours on a weekday, 10 hours on a weekday, you know, either making pictures or working on printing techniques or sitting down just reading. Like I've had quote unquote work days where I literally wake up and I am basically like reading and watching video interviews until 6, 7 p.m. And like that is work. That is my job. And it's not a thing I have to feel guilty about. It's not a thing I have to feel as an indulgence.
Part of the process.
I can really, yeah. And I can really embrace all of the different parts of that process as being like a meaningful, important part of my day and my day to day. And it's great. I mean, I'm from a really practical standpoint, like, making stuff takes time, and a lot of the stuff I'm working on right now requires a lot of trial and error and is pretty time intensive.
Yeah.
So from a practical standpoint, I need it, but I also just need it for my brain. Like I need that space to kind of like set one thing aside and focus on the other thing. Cause when I'm doing work for a client, whether it's a photo shoot or writing copy or working on brand strategy or whatever, like I am fully in that headspace. And to then say like, okay, cool. Instead of working on a content strategy for a luxury watch brand, I'm working on, my own personal artistic endeavors. It takes some time to get from point A to point B, and giving myself that time has been really important.
It's really quite cool because you sort of, monetizing a hobby is always, you get all the business admin, you get whenever money comes into play, and the juggle is quite interesting. One thing I love, about monetizing hobbies is that work equipment becomes tax deductible because
it's the best.
it's
the best.
It's generating income for you. So what cool tax deductions in the way of camera gear have you kind of acquired over the last year to sort of help you with those endeavors? What are you shooting?
Yeah, it's funny. I'm the only idiot who bought all of my gear before I incorporated an LLC. So dumb me. But yeah, I mean the biggest thing I bought is actually not camera gear. It's been printing gear and printing chemicals and all of that. I'm I'm doing some experimenting with platinum palladium printing,
yes.
which is an early 20th century. It's not a darkroom process, but it's similar. Like, it's a wet process. It's a chemicals and trays and washing things and all of that process. So buying all the infrastructure for that, which has been really fun. And then, working on, there's a project I'm working on kind of finishing right now that involves some kind of ambitious framing of things. It's large images, multiple prints framed in the same frame together. And then some smaller groups of things kind of mounted and framed in a strange way. So that requires being able to like work with my framer. And it's nice to be able to put that on a corporate card instead of just my personal credit card. But yeah, in terms of what I'm shooting, I mean, I'm shooting mostly a M270 with a vintage 90 millimeter lens is most of what I'm shooting these days. Some on a modern 50 millimeter Summilux, but mostly on a 90-2.8 from the 80s, a Tele-Elmarit M lens. I just love how it renders things. It's like really dreamy and just a tiny bit soft, and it's great. I really, really love it. So, that's most of what I'm shooting. And then the works, like I said, the stuff I'm working on right now, the next project, the next like body of work that'll come, is going to be a mix of these large diptychs and then some smaller, not quite collage works, but these smaller kind of mixed printing works. And then the body of work I'm working on, that I'm kind of in the stage of like finalizing, like everything's basically been shot for that. Now it's more of putting things together. And then the project after that I'm working on, that I'm kind of doing a mix of printing and shooting together, has to do with doing some weird stuff with platinum that hasn't been done before, as far as I can tell, in terms of multiple printings and kind of putting the prints through other processes. So it's a lot less of like straight photography of like shoot an image, retouch it, print it, and it's more kind of mixed media / kind of like what I'm calling like photo based work.
Cool.
And that's where having time and space really becomes important.
Can I just say, Stephen, a little while ago, we spent a couple of $1,000s on framing, as just some pictures framed. Never, ever, ever have I felt as grown up as spending that much money on. So sort of fleeting. So I can only imagine what it's like to do it, professionally.
Yeah, turns out getting like 4 foot by 3 foot sheets of museum glass made is not cheap. Turns out it's real expensive.
Yes.
Who knew?
You got a film scanner?
I do not, actually. I do not scan my own. Okay. I have a great lab that uses a really amazing drum scanner and can get me like, last time I had them drum scan a file for me for I made a large print for a client, and I needed a very big digital negative to work from, a very big digital file. And the file I got, not broken out into 4-channel, but just compressed back to just a single like 16-bit monochrome file, was 850 megabytes for one picture.
Wow.
The 4-channel version was, I think, like 1.4 or 1.5 gigs. So yeah, it's not a scanner I can have at home. So that's a case where like when I need something big, I just have the pros do it. They do a much better job than I would do anyway.
Absolutely. Hey, we've talked a little bit about your other business, Rime and Reason. Creative agency. I've got a question that I wish I had known earlier in my life. What is a creative agency?
So the great thing is, a creative agency is whatever the hell you tell people a creative agency is, which is amazing. Life hack. If you call it a creative agency, nobody knows what that means, so you get to just tell them what it means. At least in my case, honestly, I think the word, the like terminology creative agency is only partially helpful. I kind of played around with trying to use some sort of other terminology, and honestly, it just ended up being more confusing than helpful. So I went with the imperfect creative agency. But what Rime and Reason does, I'll speak for myself. What Rime and Reason does is we help consumer brands tell stories about what they do and then build communities around people who find those stories compelling. So that can mean if you're a luxury watch brand, which, watch brands right now are probably, in terms of time that the agency, both like myself and contractors and other people are putting in, watch brands are probably like 75% of what we're doing right now.
Awesome.
It's been as much of a split as like 50-50. We're just heavy on watch stuff right now, which is great. Very happy with the clients we have. And so if you're a watch brand and you want to create content, now that can be a blog on your website, it can be marketing materials, it can be advertising campaigns, it can be social media, it can be YouTube series, any sort of way. It can be in-person programming. It can be any sort of way that you want to communicate with your audience. We can help you strategize how to do that, how to make sure that it results in the correct results for your business. And then how to make sure that it has long-term impact by actually building community and a sense of devotion to your brand. So, I think this comes as no surprise to you guys, but every brand now, every company that sells stuff thinks that they need content.
Yeah.
And most of them have no idea what that means, because until 3 to 5 years ago, their business was essentially a shop, right? Like they were retailers. Now everybody who's a retailer thinks they also need to be like a magazine publisher. And I think sometimes that's true and sometimes it's not. And so the big thing that, we try to do with Rime and Reason to set ourselves apart is my first question to a new client is always why do you want to do this and what do you hope to get out of it? And good answers to that question are not, oh, well, such and such other brand is doing X, or, oh, well, we know we need to do whatever because, it's expected of us. It's that's fine. And yes, those sometimes are valid reasons to do things. I don't think they're super compelling reasons to do things. And often that's a recipe for a business to spend a whole bunch of money on an agency or a contractor and then end up real disappointed 6 months or a year later when they've spent a whole bunch of money and haven't, quote unquote, gotten anything out of it. So we work specifically with brands who know, we want to grow our, it's real often it's real brass tack stuff. It's we want to drive more sales online. And we know that the way to do that is by making stuff that people find compelling that they'll then click through to shop from. And that's a thing we can do. We know, I know how to do that. Or they'll say, oh, we want to do in-person events so that we can grow, the kind of community of people who are chattering about us on a daily basis on the internet. That's a thing we can do. So yeah, that's kind of the sprawling answer for what we do. And, as important, I think, is what we don't do, which is we're not a PR agency. I've had a couple clients ask about that. We do not do PR. I can recommend you a great publicist if you need one, but I am not a publicist, nor do I employ a publicist. And the other thing we don't do is we're not a performance marketing agency. So if your goal is to just get your, cost per click as low as possible on Facebook, I'm not the right person to do that. There are people who are much smarter at that and much better at that than I am. And I would highly recommend you contract them. You'll be much happier.
I love it. Well, I know Felix has prepped you for a recommendation, but before he asks you for something off the cuff, I want to ask you something a little bit more specific. I want to hear your green tea recommendation.
Ooh, green tea recommendations. Okay. So in terms of where to go to buy green tea, I'll shout out the folks at Kettle, Kettl. They're based in Brooklyn. I believe they're husband and wife. I think they're married. They're definitely partners. I'm not sure if they're married or not. I believe they are. And they get the best stuff. Like some of it is absurdly good, like too good for me to be drinking on a daily basis, to be honest. But whether you want really good matcha, which they even grind some of their own at their cafe in Brooklyn, like they get the leaves in and they mill it in store. And then they get all of the other stuff, sencha, gyokuro, genmaicha, all of the Japanese teas. So I'd recommend giving them a look. I've never had anything bad from them. I think the Shincha cultivars are just out, which is it's like Beaujolais, but for green tea. It's like the first of the season harvest. I think was out maybe a month or so ago. You can still get them. Yeah, so I would recommend them. They're pretty wonderful. These days they have a matcha called, let me just look it up here. Yeah, they have this matcha called Hanaka. That's maybe on the more entry level part of their spectrum. And that's kind of my like daily drinker right now. It's really nice and like kind of rich, a little bit creamy, not too heavy. It's a little warm here this time of year, so not something I don't always want something like super rich and super umami heavy first thing in the morning when it's 75, 80 degrees out.
Good call, good shout.
I don't drink green tea, but
really,
I'm now not much.
There's an art to it.
It's all right.
Well, there's an entire culture built around it, I believe.
Yeah, no judges.
But I was about to say maybe I should try. Maybe I've just been drinking the wrong green tea. I would like to ask you, not for one recommendation, Stephen, before we wrap. I want two, and I will specifically ask. Because you're a duality that encompasses the world. I want a high culture and a low culture recommendation.
Interesting. Mm-hmm. I can do that. It's funny. I was debating between two, and one is high and one is low. So that's perfect. We didn't coordinate this, but it's perfect. So the high culture one is a bit tough only because you're going to have to be able to get to London to go see it over the next couple of months. I guess you can go look at it online and kind of do some reading on it. So maybe do that if you can't go physically see it. But I want to recommend this year's Serpentine Pavilion in London. The Serpentine Gallery every summer basically hires an architect to create a temporary structure next to the gallery in the park in London. So this year's is done by Theaster Gates, who's a Chicago-based artist. He's not an architect. It's the first time they've ever had somebody who's not a licensed architect do it. So David Adjaye and his practice acted as essentially the like architects of record on this structure. But Theaster Gates is an amazing Chicago-based artist. He does a lot of like community practice stuff, restoring buildings, creating community spaces, kind of salvaging objects as records of specifically the Black community on the south side of Chicago. I spent a year living on the south side of Chicago when I was a graduate student. I have a deep affection for that place, and he's doing incredible stuff. So all of that to say, he's also a ceramicist trained in Japan. He's a really just incredible guy. I think he's one of the most interesting artists working today. So he created this thing called the Black Chapel. It's an incredible structure. I won't bore people too much just babbling anymore about it, but there's a lot to unpack. I recommend you Google it, do some reading about it. And if you're in London, just go. You don't have to like get tickets or anything. It's a public space. There's a little coffee bar in it, actually, like tucked off to the side. Go just like get a coffee or a tea and just sit and walk around and observe other people. And like, it's really, I am not a spiritual or religious person. It's a place where it's hard not to like feel stuff. And I can't recommend it highly enough. I'm extremely thankful that I happened to be in London a couple weeks ago, right after it opened, and got to go see it. So that's my high culture recommendation.
Very good.
Go low.
Real low.
for low culture. It's not really that low, but it's like kind of goofy. Is I noticed the other day on my Spotify that there was a new single that it was promoting to me from a band that hasn't released any new music in 12 years. And the band is a band called Voxtrot, Voxtrot. They're an Austin, Texas band. That's where I grew up, for anybody who doesn't know. They were like kind of a thing when I was in high school. They were like a local band. It's very like classic early 2000s indie rock.
Nice.
They were one of those bands where like they were a local thing and we were all sure that they were going to like blow up and become this huge thing. They never quite did for various reasons. Like there were some problems within the band. The lead singer was a school teacher. I think he was a kindergarten teacher. The new single is called Kindergarten. And he like wanted to keep teaching. It was a whole thing, but it's a band I love. I listen to their music still all the time. They split up in 2010. The music, like most of the stuff that they're like quote unquote known for is from like 2007, 2008. They just dropped a new single. They announced like an 8-show reunion tour. So I'm hoping to get to see them in September this year. I've never seen them live. And they released like a remastered thing that they're calling, let me just double check this. Sorry. So they also just released this thing that they're just calling Early Music. It's kind of a remaster of 10 songs from their various like EPs and singles. It's great. It's just like, for me, it's pure nostalgia. It's music I've continued listening to, but to have something new from them and the idea that they're back out on tour, it just kind of like puts a smile on my face. It's such a silly little thing, but it's like a little touchstone. So if you don't know the band Voxtrot and you like that kind of early 2000s indie rock, I think they're fantastic. Go just listen to Early Music. It's 10 songs, super quick, in and out. I think you'll enjoy it.
Nice.
Fantastic, Stephen. Great recommendation. I'm going to be putting that on as I make another green tea this morning.
Check it out. It's good stuff.
Raised by Wolves might be the first track I play.
Raised by Wolves is a classic. That's the one to start with.
Slaps, the kids say. Thank you so much for joining Felix and I. It's been great to catch up.
Finally,
we'll make sure we link up. Yeah, I know. 2 years in, we finally.
I know. I'm glad. Thank you guys for having me. I really, really appreciate it. Love the show, and it's fun to catch up with old friends about old times. It's a good thing these days.
Well, guys, thank you for listening to today's episode. Thank you to today's episode sponsors, Tag Heuer. Make sure you check out that bright orange Aquaracer, and of course, Artem Straps, artemstraps.com. Felix, where can the people find us?
ot.podcast on Instagram, otthepodcast@gmail.com, the internet. Your favorite.
Link up at our Discord.
Yeah, Discord. Mate, Discord's going off. We've got some people are talking about Frank Mueller like he's going out of style.
He's coming back into style, but it's a story for another time. All right, guys, if you like OT, tell your friends, family, I don't know, your church choir, everyone, and leave a 5-star review. We will see you next week.
Peace.
Bye.